Hello, listeners! Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's golden age and the few years surrounding it. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today is a very special episode because it is dedicated to my grandma Shirley. She turns 90 years old this week, on Thanksgiving. So I wanted to do something extra special for her. I already covered her favorite actress, Doris Day, so for the week of her 90th birthday, I thought it would be fun to cover the Best Actress Oscar winner from the year of her birth, 1934. Katharine Hepburn won her first Best Actress Oscar at the March 16, 1934 ceremony for her role in Morning Glory. But some of you might know I already covered Katharine Hepburn. Today, I'm going to talk about the actress that won the Best Actress Oscar for her work in 1934, but actually received the statuette in February of 1935. The 7th Annual Academy Award ceremony was held in the Biltmore Bowl of the Biltmore Hotel on Wednesday, February 27, 1935. The ceremony was honoring films released in 1934. The year my amazing grandma entered the world. On the night of the ceremony, my grandma Shirley was only 1 day shy of being 3 months old. The presenter for the Best Actress Academy Award was an adorable 6-year-old Shirley Temple. And the winner was Claudette Colbert for her role as Ellie in It Happened One Night. So today we will be discussing the life of Claudette Colbert, the winner of the Best Actress Academy Award for her work in the 1934 film It Happened One Night. Before I dive into Claudette's life, I want to share a couple of interesting things from the 7th Annual Academy Award ceremony. First of all, It Happened One Night also won the Oscar for Best Picture. Clark Gable snagged the Best Actor award for his work on the film. Oh, Clark Gable, he is my favorite Golden Age dreamboat. Man, he's good looking. Anyways, Frank Capra won for Best Director for the movie, and Robert Riskin won for Writing and Adaptation. It Happened One Night was a huge success that year. It's a great movie if you haven't seen it. It has a beautiful ending. And we get to see Clark Gable with his shirt off. The 7th Annual Academy Award ceremony was the first time protesters lined up outside because of their disagreement on the nomination selections. Apparently, there were a lot of people very upset that Myrna Loy and Bette Davis had not been nominated for Best Actress. But I also read that write-ins were also allowed this year for the first time, so Bette Davis actually did become a nominee. The nominees for Best Actress were Bette Davis, Grace Moore, Claudette Colbert, and Norma Shearer. This was the first ceremony to honor music as a category. 2 categories actually, Best Song and Best Score. Editing was also introduced as a category at this ceremony. One final note, 6-year-old Shirley Temple received a special award in recognition of her outstanding contribution to screen entertainment during the year of 1934. Now on to our Best Actress winner from the year my grandma was born, Claudette Colbert. Claudette Colbert was born Emily Chachouin on September 13, 1903 in Saint-Mandé, just outside of Paris, France. Her parents were Jean-Marie and George Chachouin, and they named little Emily after Jean's sister of the same name. But they called her Lily after actress Lily Langtry. Lily, or Claudette, was the second child for the family. She had an older brother named Charles. George owned a small pastry shop, and Jean also held a variety of jobs to help support the family. George immigrated to the United States in 1906 when little Lily was 3 years old and secured a job at a New York bank. Jean and the 2 children weren't able to join him for 5 whole years. Jean's sister Emily and their mother Marie immigrated with them at that time. The extended family lived in an apartment together in Manhattan. Their apartment was on the 5th floor, no elevator of course, and Claudette Colbert later stated that this element of her childhood is what made her grow into a woman with such attractive legs. All of those stairs she climbed several times every day for years. Shortly after relocating to New York, George and Jean had their daughter's name legally changed from Emily Shashwan to Lily Emily Shashwan. Lily was drawn to the arts at a very young age, especially painting and drawing. She had a very creative mind and was always searching for ways to express herself. When Lily was 13 years old in 1916, tragedy struck. She was rushing home from her swimming lessons to get home by her 8:30 p.m. curfew, and she was hit by a truck while crossing a busy street. She sustained a broken knee and broken ankle, as well as a back injury that she would suffer from for the rest of her life. Although this was a horrible experience and could have easily been so much worse, Lily actually liked what the experience brought her. While she recovered, her family showered her with attention, and she really liked that. During the 4 months I was helpless in bed, and for the following 5 months when I walked on crutches and a later cane, I changed a lot. Later on, I even dramatized my illness and clung to the cane long after I really needed it, she said. It sounds like the family was really tight-knit. Lily and her father had an especially loving bond. She and her mother weren't as close emotionally, as her mother and brother Charles were closer. Ready for another name change? Teenage Lily, who was born Emily, now wanted another new name. She really wanted a first name that started with the same letter as her last name for some reason. So Lily Shashwan began going by Claudette Shashwan. Okay, now I'll begin referring to her as Claudette. I know it's been a confusing ride so far. Claudette began attending Washington Irving High School after her recovery. This was a great fit for her because the school was highly regarded for its excellent arts programs. Like I said, she was mostly interested in drawing and painting, but one of her teachers saw another creative side of her and encouraged her to try out for a community play. The play, in fact, was written by this teacher, Alice Rostetter. So it was a great honor to be encouraged by the woman who actually wrote the play. Claudette did try out, and she got a part. Her feet first touched a stage in 1919 when she was 16 years old. You might expect me to next say that she fell in love with performing for an audience and knew that a life on stage was it for her. Well, I think she did enjoy it very much, but she still dreamed of being an artist, a painter or an illustrator. Those dreams shifted a little by the time Claudette graduated from high school, but she still wanted to set forth in the world, nurturing her creative mind. Her Aunt Emily was a professional seamstress and had taught Claudette how to sew, and how to sew well. This skill, coupled with her creative thinking mind, made Claudette embark on a life as a fashion designer. She began studying fashion design immediately after high school. She worked in a dress shop and gave French lessons to support herself through her studies while she reached for her dreams. She was going to become a great fashion designer. But then everything changed in 1923 when Claudette was 20 years old. Claudette met playwright Anne Morrison at a cocktail party. Morrison noticed something special in Claudette, just as her high school teacher had, and she suggested that Claudette try out for her new play. She took this suggestion and ran with it, and she got a small part in that play, The Wild Westcotts. Now she was starting to reconsider her future and think that just maybe she belongs on a stage. She decided to put her fashion design dreams on hold and pursue acting. She was really excited about the potential future this could hold for her. But there was someone who was definitely not excited about it: Claudette's mother. She did not support her daughter's desire to perform, and she forbade her from acting under their family name. So with that, Claudette Colbert made her Broadway debut on Christmas Eve of 1923, and the rest is history. Stage producer A.H. Woods offered her a contract with his company after that debut, and she spent the next 6 years performing on stages both on Broadway and all throughout the U.S. She was even sent to London to perform. Claudette fell in love for the first time during her time with the troupe. He was a leading man, Norman Foster. And on that trip to London for performances in 1928, Claudette and Norman got married. Now it's a time that women do traditionally change their names after marriage, but Claudette isn't going for another name change. She was not a traditional gal. She kept the name Claudette Colbert, and she and her new husband remained living in separate residences. She called it a modern marriage, but in reality, she wanted to stay with her mother because her father had sadly died 3 years prior, and she wanted to be there for her mother. Claudette Colbert appeared on screen for the first time in 1927 in the silent film For the Love of Mike. The film wasn't well received, but Claudette was. Moviegoers and critics loved what they saw, and so did talent scouts at Paramount Pictures. But they weren't interested in having her relocate to Hollywood, not quite yet. They wanted her to sign with them to work out of their studio in Queens, New York. This was actually wonderful news for Claudette. She loved performing on Broadway, and she loved the nightlife in New York. She just loved New York. If she was able to make pictures in New York, she could still do stage work on her downtimes. Now, of course, this was the exciting time in filmmaking when silent films were transitioning to talkies. Claudette Colbert's first talking film was a picture called The Hole in the Wall with Edward G. Robinson. Not an awesome film, but again, good reviews for Claudette herself. In her next film, she starred alongside her husband, Norman. They still hadn't been living together and really weren't spending much time together at all. It was definitely an unconventional marriage. Actually, almost non-existent, except for the paperwork that proved its existence. Claudette continued to appear in films, showing her ability to play a diverse array of genres. She also continued to receive positive praise for her work, even if the films themselves weren't great. Now that Claudette was getting comfortable on sets and making a name for herself in the industry, she was feeling very confident in speaking her mind on the set. She quickly gained herself a reputation of being difficult to work with, especially amongst cameramen. She wanted to make sure that they shot her at the precise angles that would best present her, and the crew would often butt heads with her over these high demands. Claudette continued to work on stage productions as well, but in the fall of 1931, she had a decision to make. Paramount closed its Queens studio, and they asked Claudette to relocate to Hollywood to continue her film career there. This would mean leaving Broadway behind. She loved the stage, but she also loved the thought of what may lie ahead in Hollywood, which was building and embarking on its grandest couple of decades in history. She could not miss out on that. She was going to Hollywood. But don't worry, she'll be back on Broadway. As her fame continued to rise, Claudette hired her brother Charles to be her agent. It sounds like her mother pretty much forced her to hire him. He had zero experience in this kind of work, but as it turned out, he was a natural negotiator and was able to help his sister secure very profitable contract agreements. One of Claudette Colbert's first films in Hollywood was The Sign of the Cross in 1932. This was a pre-code film, and there was a pretty revealing bathtub scene that showed just a little bit more than was initially planned. She definitely made her arrival in Hollywood known with this scene. She continued to turn out film after film, with most of them gaining great reviews for her. And then came 1934, which would be Claudette Colbert's year in Hollywood. And it would be the year for my family as well, with the birth of my Grandma Shirley. In 1934, Harry Cohn approached Claudette to star in a film called It Happened One Night, which was being directed by Frank Capra. Well, Claudette had worked once before with Capra, and she didn't like it. She had vowed to never work with him again. But Harry Cohn offered her a ton of money to do the film, and he promised her that they could get it done very quickly. But none of that should matter because the biggest incentive was her male lead in the movie. The hunkiest of all hunks, Clark Gable. Claudette was pretty excited about that part too. Neither Claudette Colbert or Clark Gable thought the script of It Happened One Night was any good. It was average at best, they both thought, but they went ahead with it all the same. Frank Capra really tried to make a positive working environment for Claudette, but it sounds like the girl could really hold a grudge. The two ended up butting heads several times during filming. One funny disagreement they got into was over the hitchhiking scene in the film. She thought the famous raising of the skirt scene, where she shows her leg to get a car to stop, was highly inappropriate. But Frank Capra informed her that the scene was being shot with or without her leg. There were countless other legs in Hollywood that would be happy to appear in a Clark Gable movie. So she gave in and did the scene, because she considered her legs much more attractive than any stunt double leg that they would ever be able to find. Everyone made it through unscathed, but Claudette was very unhappy with the final result. She even went as far as saying it was, quote, the worst picture in the world, end quote. Well, she was the only person in the world to think that, because It Happened One Night was a huge success and remained Columbia Pictures' biggest box office hit for decades. I will admit, I can actually see the story maybe coming across as lackluster. But that movie has exactly the right cast to make it into a really, really amazing film. Claudette and Clark Gable were perfect in it, and I loved Walter Connolly as her father. Casting matters. It Happened One Night ended up being one of the most successful films in history and had the prestigious standing of winning all 5 of the highest Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Actor, and Best Actress. Claudette Colbert was surprised and thrilled when she learned of her Academy Award nomination. It was an honor to be nominated, but she knew she wouldn't actually win. She actually didn't even go to the ceremony. That's how sure she was that she wasn't going to win. She was about to board a train when a studio assistant caught her and dragged her to the ceremony to accept her award. She wasn't dressed for the Academy Awards. She was dressed for a train ride across the country. She told the reporter, quote, I really had no idea I would get it. In fact, I was ready to leave for New York the night they called to tell me about it. Dressed in a mousy brown suit, I was escorted into the banquet hall full of diamonds and tailcoats. It was especially embarrassing because I imagined they all thought I was putting on an act, making an entrance, end quote. She followed up It Happened One Night with Cleopatra and Imitation of Life, a very successful 1934. Claudette Colbert teamed up on screen for the first time with Fred MacMurray in 1935's The Gilded Lady, and the two's on-screen chemistry was unmistakable. Hollywood dynamite, as one critic said. In total, Claudette Colbert and Fred MacMurray made 7 films together. Claudette continued to rise the ranks in Hollywood, and soon she was amongst the top 10 highest-paid actresses in the country. Claudette still had a husband throughout all of this dash to superstardom. She and Norman Foster never did live a traditional married life. She finally decided in 1935 that it was time to get divorced, which really didn't affect either of them too much emotionally, since they had never really lived a married life. But it did free Claudette up so she could marry someone else. UCLA surgeon Dr. Joel Pressman. The two were married on Christmas Eve of 1935 and purchased a ranch in Northern California where they raised cattle and horses. Joel loved flying, so Claudette bought him a very thoughtful gift to nurture his hobby. An airplane. Pretty nice gift. Claudette Colbert was embarking on a new chapter in her life with her new marriage. An actual marriage. And a happy one. But aside from that personal happiness, she was also setting forward on a new chapter in her professional life. A life of comedy. With her huge success at the box office, Claudette had a little more say within her contract. And she wanted to do more comedies. She'd always thought laughter was very important, and she wanted to be able to give that to people. She quickly became the top female star in the screwball comedy genre. Claudette Colbert was on fire and was Hollywood's biggest box office star in the year of 1938. She also became the highest paid woman in Hollywood after negotiating her contract for a whopping $425,000 per year, which would equate to over $9.5 million today. With this superstardom came even more difficulty on film sets. Claudette became obsessed with lighting and cinematography. She demanded that she was lit and filmed in just the right ways to best accentuate her physical strengths. And if a cameraman didn't follow her instructions, she was not happy. This kind of behavior gave her a serious reputation in Hollywood as being very difficult to work with. And then came Technicolor. Black and white films can be very forgiving, and for someone as obsessed with her appearance as Claudette Colbert, the new invention of Technicolor made her almost hysterical. She first appeared in a Technicolor film in 1939 in Drums Along the Mohawk with Henry Fonda, and she avoided color for the rest of her career. She was described as having a, quote, deep-rooted desire to be in shape, efficient, and under control, end quote. I'm sure you've come to that realization already. In 1940, Claudette's manager brother convinced her to walk away from her contract and become a free agent in Hollywood. This would allow her to negotiate higher pay for each individual movie she did, and she would have more control over which films she appeared in. It turned out to be a very good move. She spent the 1940s starring with some of the other biggest names in Hollywood: Spencer Tracy, Hedy Lamarr, Veronica Lake, Fred MacMurray, Clark Gable, Orson Welles, John Wayne, and she remained one of the top-paid actresses in the country. The 1950s brought a difficult transition period into Claudette Colbert's life: aging. And a woman obsessed with having a perfect youthful appearance did not take kindly to aging. Claudette turned 47 years old in 1950. I know that doesn't sound very old now, but I think 47 was quite a different age in 1950 than it is now. I'm only a few years away from it myself, and I feel pretty darn young. But Claudette Colbert was having a really difficult time accepting the changes that aging brings. A hilarious thing she said to Bette Davis once was, quote, "You're the luckiest of us all. You started playing older women when you were young. You never had to bridge the gap," end quote. Suddenly, Claudette Colbert was being cast in, gasp, maternal roles. She did not like this. She played the parts well, but she didn't like it. They weren't all like this, and she was really happy for that. Claudette Colbert was an absolutely striking woman. She definitely stood out in a crowd. She had a gorgeous round face, beautiful smooth skin, big animated eyes, and she exuded a beautiful spirit that just lit up the screen. She was absolutely gorgeous throughout her entire life from the photos and movies I've seen, but I understand aging isn't for everyone. As part of this transition in her career, Claudette had Charles put a 5 o'clock clause in all of her film contracts. In order to dedicate more time to her marriage, she wanted to be done working by 5 o'clock each and every day. She loved her husband very much, and she wanted to make him her priority. I think that is very admirable. Unfortunately, this decision cost her many, many roles. Most directors refused to agree to such terms. But she wasn't done working. Things were just different now. In 1954, Claudette traveled to France for a few months to do a couple of movies. She was offered a pretty impressive paycheck to do them, so she jumped at the opportunity. Her days of being the highest paid woman in Hollywood were far behind her now, so she appreciated offers like this. Plus, she was thrilled to return to France for a while. Claudette Colbert's last starring film role was Texas Lady in 1955, but she still had quite a bit of television work ahead of her. She was spending more and more time focusing on her personal life, which she very, very much deserved. Claudette's Aunt Emily passed away in 1954. She had been Claudette's mother's sister and best friend, and Jean was now lost without her, and needed more help herself now that she was getting older. Claudette and her mother had never been particularly close. Remember, she was a huge daddy's girl, but she dedicated much of her time and energy into helping her mother. She also made time to just plain enjoy life. She had the ranch in Northern California, a home in Palm Springs, a home in Los Angeles, and she often rented a cottage in the south of France. In 1958, 55-year-old Claudette Colbert appeared on a Broadway stage for the first time in 3 decades when she starred in a play called Marriage Go Round. It ran for 16 months and was highly successful. It even earned Claudette a Tony Award nomination. She did a couple of other Broadway shows in the early 1960s, but she had a new passion project during this time, too, that was keeping her pretty busy. Thinking of the retirement years, Claudette purchased an old plantation house in Barbados for her and her husband to spend much of their time together at after his retirement. She had big dreams for this plantation. She arranged for it to be completely gutted and remodeled, making it the perfect vacation home for them. The renovations were completed in 1963. Claudette and Joel loved it so much that they decided to sell their other homes and move to Barbados permanently once Joel retired. And they did just that. They were in heaven. But fate had a nasty trick up its sleeve for them. In 1967, Joel became ill. Later that year, he was diagnosed with late-stage liver cancer. He was a surgeon. He knew his odds. He knew exactly what was happening within his body. Joel Pressman knew he was dying, and he wanted to die at their dream home in Barbados. But eventually, the pain was just too intense, and he needed to be in a hospital where doctors could manage his pain. Claudette made the difficult decision to bring Joel back to California, where he was hospitalized at UCLA. Joel Pressman died at the UCLA Medical Center on February 26, 1968. He was 67 years old, and he and Claudette had been married for 33 happy years. Claudette had his body flown to Barbados, where he was put to rest. After the initial mourning period of her beloved husband, Claudette became the hostess with the mostest at her plantation home in Barbados. She invited friends from Hollywood to stay and would throw lavish dinner parties. Her mother would come to stay often too until she passed away in 1970. Sadly, Claudette's brother Charles died just 2 years after their mother. She had them both interred in Barbados with Joel, and she planned the same for herself when her time came. Claudette was very lonely now, hence the frequent parties. She loved to be around people. And this is also what kept her doing stage work. She just needed that presence of others around her. Her last time on stage was in the spring of 1985, when she was 81 years old. Claudette Colbert's final piece of work was the popular television miniseries The Two Mrs. Grenvilles in 1987, which landed her a Golden Globe Award. She was 85 years old at the time. Throughout her 80s, Claudette still spent most of her time at her home in Barbados, but she kept an apartment in Manhattan as well. She suffered her first stroke in 1993 when she was 89 years old, and a few more followed in subsequent years. Claudette's body had really weakened from the stress of the strokes. Her body was tired. On July 29, 1996, Claudette Colbert drew her last breaths. Her last words were, "I want to go home." She was 92 years old. She was put to rest next to her husband, her mother, and her brother in Barbados. Over 700 people traveled to Barbados to attend her funeral. In 1999, Claudette Colbert was named the 12th greatest female star in classic Hollywood cinema by the American Film Institute. Now I would like to share a few other interesting things I learned about Claudette Colbert during my research. Bullet point number 1. Claudette Colbert was honored with the Ellis Island Medal of Honor by the Statue of Liberty Ellis Island Foundation in 1986, 10 years prior to her passing. Bullet point number 2. Claudette was featured on advertisements for both Lucky Strike and Chesterfield cigarettes. You know, back when cigarettes were glamorous and cool. So you can see these ads online, but I'm going to describe the Lucky Strike ad to you. It was from 1938 at the very height of her career. The headline says, "From laughs to tears in 30 seconds. That kind of confused me, so I read on. It goes on to say, quote, Claudette Colbert tells how the throat strain of emotional acting led her to Lucky's, end quote. That confused me a bit too. Seriously, this whole ad seems like a Saturday Night Live skit. Here's what it continues to say. Quote, emoting to order is certainly a real strain on the throat. That's why an actress thinks twice before choosing her cigarette. Miss Colbert says, after experimenting, I'm convinced that my throat is safest with Lucky's, end quote. It goes on to talk about how, quote, tobacco experts swear by the safety of Lucky Strikes. Well, Claudette Colbert changed her tune about her favorite smoke by 1948 when she appeared in a Chesterfield ad. She then said, quote, I've tried them all. Chesterfield's is my favorite cigarette. Bullet point number 3. Claudette Colbert had a decades-long close friendship with Ronald and Nancy Reagan. They would visit her in Barbados, she would visit them at the White House during their time in the presidency, and the Reagans would attend every single one of her Broadway plays. Claudette even spent Christmas of 1985 with the Reagans at the White House. Bullet point number 4. I just want to end on a quote from Miss Colbert. She said, success anywhere means just plain hard work. Whatever you do, find something you like, work in earnest, and have the patience of an angel for disappointment. And then you will be what they call successful. I just think that's really good advice, because hard work does pay off. In conclusion, Claudette Colbert was a spitfire who had so much creative energy boiling inside of her, and she luckily found just the right way to express it. She worked tirelessly for decades to provide outstanding entertainment to millions. She added richness to every role she played with her vibrant presence. Claudette knew what she wanted out of her professional career, and she wasn't afraid to stand up for herself to get what she thought she deserved. She was a huge, strong, powerful force packed into a teensy, tiny little package. Thank you, Claudette Colbert, for showing us what hard work looks like. Now, if I could shift focus to my Grandma Shirley for a moment. Like Claudette Colbert, my Grandma Shirley is also presented in a teensy tiny little package. However, my grandma's personality differs greatly from that of Claudette Colbert. My grandma is very thoughtful, graceful, composed, and kind-hearted, which I'm sure Claudette Colbert also was. I guess I'm trying to say my grandma is not the type to yell at a cameraman for filming her wrong. She isn't a huge, extravagant personality. She exudes a calming grace and a great, great appreciation for life. She loves nature. She loves trees. She loves flowers. I can point to any flower and say, "What is this flower called, Grandma?" and she will know it. But above all, she loves family. Family is everything to her. My grandma turns 90 years old this week. But if you were to see a photo of her, you wouldn't believe it for a second. She's active, healthy, and very youthful looking. She has always valued her body and her mind and respected it enough to take very good care of it. She is about the best role model a girl could have for a grandma, and I value every single moment I get to spend with her. Happy 90th birthday, Grandma Shirley. I love you. Thank you all for listening. If you are interested in supporting the show and getting some sweet bonus content and perks in return, please go to patreon.com/Stars of the Golden Age podcast to see the tiers of support available. I have some great bonus episodes in the works. We also do the Movie of the Month Club, so it would be super fun to get a bunch of people involved in that. Please take a moment to rate and review where you listen to your podcast to help with visibility to potential new listeners. And you can also follow the show on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Thanks, everyone. And one more time, a very, very happy 90th birthday to my Grandma Shirley. My main source for this episode was a book titled Legends of Hollywood, The Life of Claudette Colbert by Charles River Editors. I also used a book titled More Forgotten Movie Stars of the 30s, 40s, and 50s by Gary Koca, Oscars.org, and My Knight in Shining Armor, IMDB.